Hello, my name is Yannis Kyriakides. In this video, I'll be talking about my trackers cycle of works, the ideas behind them, how they were composed, and some of the technology and software that was used in the process. The trackers cycle is a series of 4 pieces: Satyr Drama, Trackers, Testudo, and Waveshaper. It's called trackers because they are all based or inspired by a fragment of a satire play by Sophocles called Ich Nephthei, which means the trackers or the searchers. And this was a fragment of a play that was found in 1912, consisting of about 400 lines of text, basically about half the play. And it's remarkable in being the only other preserved satire drama, albeit in fragments, other than Euripides' Cyclops. So the story of Trackers revolves around the myth of Hermes and the origins of music. Apollo discovers that his cattle is missing, and he employs the satyrs, led by Silenus, to search for them. In exchange, he offers them freedom. Tracking their footprints, they come to a cave where they hear a sound which they've never heard before. They freeze in terror and refuse to enter the cave. The mountain nymph Kylene explains to them that the sound is of baby Hermes tuning a lyre, an instrument he has created using the cowhide stretched over the shell of a tortoise. Since the satyrs also don't know what music is, this has to be explained to them. Apollo appears, and Hermes, in order to make up for his theft and killing of Apollo's cattle, offers him this new instrument to make amends for his crime. So this then is the origin of Apollo's lyre, and one could say also the myth of the origins of music. So I'm fascinated by this myth because for me it touches on the subject of what is music. Being confronted with a sound that one doesn't have an explanation for. Also, Sophocles' reading of the myth has to do with social hierarchies of music. Who has the right to decide what music is? Does the lyre belong to the gods, to us humans, or to nature? It also touches on the power structures of music, the ownership of music, but also the relation of nature to culture. The first instrument was, after all, made from the dead bodies of 2 animals. So these 4 pieces, inspired by the myth, are written for the group that I co-founded and play with, called Maze. This consists of musicians Anne Berge, flute, Wiek Hijmans, guitar, Gareth Davis, bass clarinet, Dario Calderone, contrabass, and Reinier van Houdt on piano, and also myself on computer and synthesizers. One of our main sources of repertoire is open score, so in the tradition of John Cage and onwards. So we look at video scores, meta scores, network scores, or interactive scores, where the musicians can influence and affect the outcome of a piece through their interaction with it. Examples of some of these pieces are Anne Berge's Raw, where decisions of the musicians made through a network and special software affect the direction the piece takes. And my own Oniricon, which is an app that can be downloaded from the App Store. It's a book, score, and instrument where the interactions of audience and musicians affect the generations of new notes on the iPad. Now I will talk about each of the individual pieces that make up the tracker cycle. First, there's trackers, the main framework and background to the whole cycle. It can be played separately, but also as part of the whole tracker cycle underneath the other pieces. Essentially, it's a piece of 45 minutes that was first conceived as a performance installation with artist Konrad Smolensky. So in the space, there is a dispersed drum kit, cables, and speaker installations that correspond to the number of musicians that are playing. Sonically, the piece consists of various layers of sound, a clock of sine tones, that I have here in the notation. Here I have a score of them. They're very low sounds, they require subwoofers to really sound, and they're dispersed through the space over 5 or 6 speakers. Gradually it modulates through all the cycle of pitches back to the beginning again, so the whole 45 minutes can be repeated over a whole day. There's also a deconstructed drum sound that I have here as an example. These are also dispersed through all the monitors on stage. And the idea that it does relate to the deconstructed drum kit that we see on the stage. And it's made up of also sine wave type movements in the rhythm. This is a program I use to generate the triggers of these rhythms. It's a program called AC Toolbox. It's written in Lisp, and I can define, let's say, the rhythmic motion of the sounds using these formulas. The rhythm, the pitch, the loudness, and the patterns of channels that it moves through. So the music notation is in the form of video that's projected from the ceiling to the floor of the performance space, with the accompanying multi-channel soundtrack synchronized. Musicians follow the notation, playing the letters as they appear, and finding ways to interpret the interaction between the lines and symbols, and using any feature in the space to help this reading of the score. So objects, sounding or otherwise, are used in the space to create situations where the interference of score and space is enhanced. So the musicians are literally tracking the space. The way I created these lines in the video was with a program called Processing, which I also use in some of the other parts of the cycle. In this case, I wanted to create the idea of a musical stave, but a musical stave that also relates a bit to the strings of a lyre, as it were. So in the program I can define how many lines, how many strings or staves I have, and the speed in which they move, the amplitude of these waves. It's partly determined by the place we are in the music, how many pitches are important in that particular moment, and the relation between the pitches. So I'll leave the recording playing for a while. It's from a recording Mays did in a venue in Amsterdam called Splendor, where one could see the video score projected on the floor and the movement of the musicians in the space and how they interpret the symbols that they come across. Okay, so that was trackers on its own. Now I'll talk a bit about Satyr Drama, which forms the main narrative structure of the piece. So this is basically a line-for-line reading of the whole Satyr Drama, or the incomplete Satyr Drama of Sophocles. And because this is a recording of the complete cycle, we hear it over trackers. As you can see, text plays an important part in this piece. In fact, there are basically two layers in the score here. The text and how it's translated into sound, with an algorithm and also by the musicians. And there is also a layer which I call the lyre being tuned, which is basically a series of scales on the white notes of the piano, starting with one note at a time and going to 7 by the end. This image of the lyre being tuned just goes throughout the whole piece and also relates harmonically to what is happening in the trackers layer. So over that more beautiful and harmonic layer, there is this very energetic reading of the play, word for word. Each of the voices of the drama are given a sonic character. Apollo, that we heard in the beginning, is very dramatic and ear-splitting. Silenus, the chorus leader and head of the satyrs, has a somewhat drunken, swaggering or swearing style. These are all solos shared by musicians. The chorus of satyrs always speak with a very primitive and noisy sound, while Kilane at the end has a clear, transparent and resonant sound. The characters are conveyed in the instructions to the musicians for each phrase. But they are also determined by the algorithm which translates the text into very specific sound classes. Again, I use processing, this Java language program, for this. The algorithm reads the text and, depending on the character, assigns the letters of each word to specific samples. So here we see how that looks like on the algorithm. We see this mapping here of words to MIDI messages. I have some controls in how the text is looped and repeated and the speed that it scans it, but the program itself maps and plays the sounds according to a decoding of the letters. I often use this kind of translation or transcoding between media because I'm interested in how patterns in one medium reads patterns in another. You can call it sonification. I don't usually like that word because it implies a scientific approach or scientific purpose. I prefer the concept of translation because it implies that some kind of semantic trace of one medium is left on the other. This was the opening passage of Testudo in how it appears in the cycle. Testudo is a piece for solo contrabass and electronics. That was actually the first piece I wrote in the cycle. Testudo is Latin for tortoise. I wanted the sound of the contrabass to be set against the sounds of a tortoise. In the program notes I wrote, the character of the piece is ferocious, primitive and playful, exploring aspects of performance that bring to the fore the idea of an instrument in the making, the translation of bioacoustic signals into musical signals, and ancient concepts of possession as a model of music making. So I was playing with the idea of a modern instrument being possessed, as it were, by traces of its ancient roots, the shell of a tortoise. The tortoise sounds we hear underneath are first run through an envelope and pitch follower, and are mapped onto electronic oscillator sounds to exaggerate their musicality. I then scan through the sounds slowly as if they were being passed through a microscope. The scanning is made by reading the resulting sounds in loops of about 1 second at a time, and then moving the loop forward very gradually over time. A similar scanning approach is made with the score for the contrabass. The piece is directly based on a fragment of text from the tracker's play, the part where Killane is explaining exactly what baby Hermes is doing inside the cave with the skin of the cows and the shell of the tortoise. Quote, "He has a hidden machine that makes the sound you're asking about, that so surprised you. It's a box full of pleasure that he made in just one day from a dead animal he found. And he's down there shaking it. It speaks now that it's dead, though it had no voice when it was alive. The boy calls this animal a tortoise and the instrument a lyre. So the ancient Greek text is encoded with a vocabulary of sounds that the contrabass plays, so-called extended techniques involving strange bow and finger placements. I wanted the sound world to be quite primitive and raw, even though this piece requires a lot of virtuosity to play. So these sequence of sounds, which correspond to the ancient Greek text, are also scanned in the same way as the sound is, gradually moving through the text, 1 second at a time. Here is another fragment then played by Dario Calderone with the score follower to see how the sounds are notated. Waveshaper is the last part of the tracker's cycle. The name Waveshaper comes from electronic music theory. It's a kind of synthesis where a waveform is altered or shaped to produce complex partials or higher overtones. Here is an example of how it sounds when I start with a simple waveform and I morph the shape, angle, and create folds in the wave. For this, I'm using the beautiful DPO module of Make Noise. So this piece is based partly on these sounds and partly on the idea of translating these shapes from sound to how patterns of notes are shaped. So starting with a single note, then a contour of notes gradually evolves. I was interested how this idea could also translate into a semi-visual score for iPads, where the musicians have to also interpret the shapes of their phrases by the visualization of the sound wave that they're seeing. Initially, I wrote a harmonic structure to the piece based on a gradual unfolding of harmonies. This is the sketch score, but it's not the score that the musicians see. Each of the 5 musicians of the ensemble has about 15 different moments when they see a clip playing on their iPad. This is a wave at a particular pitch being shaped and visualized through an oscilloscope. They both see and hear the wave through the iPad. Here is an example of one of the scores that the musicians see. This is the guitar part. They are also given 1 or 2 long notes on the left and a handful of short notes on the right. The idea is that the players should make up phrases that evolves with the short notes acting as grace notes or ornamentation for the long notes. The players can further be influenced by the graphic form of the waves and how they interact with the notation. I don't specify a particular way they should do this. I want that to stay a bit intuitive, but it can affect the dynamic, speed, or color of the notes that they play. So the piece develops with these evolving phrases where the musicians come and go, overlapping with one another. It's a kind of polyphony, in part inspired by the mountain music of Epirus, a region in northwest Greece, and in part by the idea of the 5 strings of the ancient lyre, whose sympathetic vibrations, resonances, and overtones are being gradually explored by the musicians. There's also visuals made with a combination of all 5 strings, as it were, these 5 wave patterns as they appear on each instrument. Here is an excerpt from Waveshaper that we recently made for Dutch radio. So to finish, I'll leave the last minute of the tracker cycle playing, the last part of the Satyr Drama. I'll put a list at the bottom of this clip where you can find all the recordings and videos of the performances of all the pieces that I've talked about. Thanks for watching, and a big thanks to Música UNAM for inviting me to make this video.